Hi there. Well, let's talk about sugar in this segment. Sugar is one of those kind of food substances that fascinates people. You probably know the historical story that sugar used to be so expensive, only the very richest families could afford it. Nowadays, of course, everybody can, and it's a bad thing because it doesn't do anybody very much good, although it is delicious. We all have to admit that. I often, over the years got many questions about sugar, and there are certain implications in the allergy field that we shall need to talk about. So let's do that now. Let's look at this whole topic of sweeteners and sugars, what's safe, what isn't safe. Is anything safe? Should we avoid sweetness altogether, maybe? Well, the first thing to say is that the term sugar is a bit of a misnomer. It covers all kinds of things from glucose, and typically we mean the kind of table sugar, white table sugar, which is called invert sugar or sucrose. And it's a mixture, basically. It's two different kind of sugars combined. Glucose is one of those. But this is the important thing for us from the point of view of allergies, which is that sugars can come from different plant origins. You've got cane sugar, which of course is the commonest and most famous perhaps. But in Europe, beet sugar, big thing, back in Napoleon's time, there was a blockade by the Royal Navy of the French, and somebody came up with the idea of beet sugar as an alternative source of sugar. When the British blockade couldn't be beaten, what better than to grow it on your own land? A sugar beet, if you've not seen one, looks rather like a large white turnip, but you can extract sugar from it. Corn famously produces sugar, especially the unpleasant stuff we don't like, the high fructose stuff. But you can get sugar from palms, coconut, many other sources basically. And as I said, we are interested in its origin. It didn't take me very long, back in the early 80s, to realize a person could be severely allergic to cane sugar, but was perfectly all right with beet sugar or coconut sugar, and so on. So, the plant is crucial. Sugar has its own health hazards, as we'll be looking at, but I'm talking about the additional hazard of being allergic to the stuff, as well as the fact that it rots your teeth and might give you a thrush and so on. Now, another point that's needed for clarification is to look at the different types of sugar. You've seen these and you're probably familiar with some of them. They go by various names. Demerara is probably the most famous, named after the town of Demerara, but there's Muscovado, Terminano. You will come across terms like soft brown sugar or dark brown sugar, light brown sugar, and so on. These vary a lot, but typically the brown sugar, you've got to get this point, which is most brown sugar is really only white sugar that's been dyed. Typically they will, if it's healthy-ish, they will dye it with molasses. It can be anything up to 10% molasses by weight, but you've got to be careful, as I'll show you in a minute, that some brown sugar is actually dyed with caramel dyes, or even worse, caramel coloring, which are azo dyes. So, that can be a big problem. Whereas things like Demerara and Muscovado are at least authentic in terms of their origin. Is brown sugar healthier? No, not really. It has, very small amounts of trace minerals, but they're so small as to be inconsequential. It's about the same calories, maybe slightly less if you take the sugar by weight, but we usually take it by volume, don't we? A teaspoon, say, or a cube. And in fact, brown sugar is likely to carry more calories looking at it that way. As I said, it's often dyed. They will take white sugar and dye it brown, then call it soft brown sugar, and you're supposed to be thrilled by that and thinking you're eating something healthy. You're most definitely not. So one of the ways to figure this out is to look for the country of origin. It should say something like country of origin, Guyana, Venezuela, Philippines, or whatever. And if it just says manufactured in Birmingham, or manufactured in Seattle or something, then you know pretty well for sure it's the fake kind of sugar. It's been doctored and is mostly suited for the manufacturer's benefit and profits, not your health, trust me. Now, we all know about the corn, the corn sugar scam. They've been pushing this high fructose corn syrup on us for years, killing the population, very cynical, and they've known that full well for the past 25 years or more. But now they're trying to get round the public's disgust with this stuff by relabeling it corn sugar. Well, I'm pleased to say the FDA in the US actually finally blocked this, and I was amazed because generally the FDA goes along with the food industry. Whatever they want they can have, no matter how many people they want to kill. The FDA will back it. It's all lies and all scam, but just for this once anyway, the FDA came down in the side of the consumer. Basically, corn sugar already has a definition. It's dextrose, which is a glucose-based product. High fructose corn syrup contains fructose, hence the name. Fructose is fruit sugar, and it's fairly liver toxic. I mean, not sufficiently toxic just from eating fruit, but if you concentrate and intensify it, as these manufacturers do, then it becomes dangerous. But in any case, as the FDA pointed out, it's a syrup, it's a liquid, whereas sugar, we all know, is a powdery or crystalline substance. So what about honey? Wouldn't that make a good substitute? Well, you can get good honey, but you've got to work hard because, again, the manufacturers and suppliers are trying to scam you. And even beekeepers, in fact, try and scam you. You know, their honey becomes popular. They want to make more money, and they can't just get more bees ad infinitum, especially recently. You've seen there's been a big decline in bee numbers, a big scare, actually, in the honey-producing community and the beekeeping community. So they do what most greedy, dishonest, criminally minded manufacturers do, and they lard up their product with fake stuff, junk, in this case just sugary water, to pad it out. The worst country in the world for this has got to be China, that sells honey that really isn't honey at all. It's just sugar water. I read a report that up to a third of honey that's consumed in the USA is actually China smuggled. If they're going to that much trouble to criminally smuggle it and get around the rules, you can be sure they're also criminally and falsely mislabeling it. So you've got to be very careful what you're buying. I mean, there's no question that and by the way, Chinese honey is quite polluted and toxic, as most foodstuffs from China are, actually. The only way to be really sure is find your own little beekeeper around the corner. You see his hives, you count the number of bottles roughly, and you know that he's not faking it. You know, he hasn't got 10 hives and he's producing 500 bottles of honey a year. That wouldn't be believable. There's all the synthetic sweetener scams, of course. Anything that can be manufactured and patented and somebody make a profit on it, they're going to throw it at you with advertising and lies and BS and tell you how good it is and fake the science and tell you there's no problem. We've been through it all before. Saccharin was the, well, cyclamate actually was the first thing around. But then we had saccharin, which was quite conclusively proved to be carcinogenic. In other words, it causes cancer. Then we had the aspartame scam, and there's no question that aspartame is extremely neurotoxic. It's one of these excitotoxins that Russell Blaylock talks about. Sucralose is filthy stuff. Its original history was developed as a pesticide. Someone was told to test it, who wasn't speaking very good English, told to test it, and they thought they said taste it. So he tasted it and reported it was very sweet. So all of a sudden this pesticide is relabeled as a sugar substitute and a sweetener, and of course it's perfectly safe even though it was a pesticide. The science behind it is scams. I went to the government health website in the US, the Institutes of Health, and it claimed that the FDA had reviewed over 100 safety studies. That's absolutely complete nonsense. It was approved. There were only ever 5 studies done before it was approved. In fact, 3 of them weren't even finished at the point when it was approved, and there were sort of less than 50 human subjects. And the worst thing of all is none of them lasted more than a couple of weeks. They weren't testing for they were testing for tooth decay and things like that. They weren't testing for brain effects. So the whole thing is a hideous scam, and the battle goes on. Tate and Lyle, who produced this filth, spend their profits and their millions suing and attacking people, like they managed to shut down Joe McCullough's website and stop his complaints being shown in Britain, for example. Was it in the US? The other way. Anyway, these people exercise a lot of clout, and they can shut you down in different countries and territories. Cyclamate is suddenly, well, maybe I brought it in here because it may make a comeback. You know, there's lots of science showing it's very toxic and dangerous and causes cancer. And then, lo and behold, some big company wants to produce it again at a profit. So all of a sudden the science is reviewed and, oh, you know, well, it didn't really cause cancer and we were quite wrong about it being dangerous for health, so it's all right really. Anyway, the current status in the USA is that it's pending review. There's no immediate plans to bring it back as market as safe, but knowing the way these things work, trust me, anytime, you know, this year, next year, cyclamate can suddenly be labelled safe, everybody's producing it, it's in your, everything from your hamburgers and your coffee syrup at Starbucks, it's pretty bad. So what about the herb things? They're natural, they're wonderful, aren't they? Well, I think they're among the worst things on the market, actually. Let me talk you through these. The most famous, of course, is stevia, and that was attacked ruthlessly by the US Food and Drug Administration as a scam, and they wouldn't allow it in. They shut down suppliers, they jailed people, they attacked them as criminals, until one day it suddenly became legal because major corporations like Coca-Cola wanted it. So they developed a patented version called Truvia. Notice the cute marketing name. And all of a sudden it's fine. The FDA has got no problem with it. Now it's being done by major food manufacturing houses. They have their patented version, but you know, the FDA cannot pretend that Truvia is safe but stevia isn't, since stevia is the plant of origin. It's quite sweet, and this is the problem with all of these things, in my opinion. This is 300 times sweeter than sugar. A tiny amount of stevia, which I hate anyway, I don't like its taste. But what's this doing to your palate? You know, the thing that I want to say to people is you know, get used to having, or to get rid of the, this is the best answer to worries about sugar, is to get rid of the need for a sweet taste. Then you don't need substitutes, okay? But when these substitutes are so powerful, there's another one being brought out called Brazane, which is 1,000 times more powerful, and that's mixed up with genetically modified corn and its preparation process. You be careful of that. There's a South African plant, which is probably the daddy of them all. It produces a sugar called thaumatin, which is 2,000 times sweeter than sugar. Why ever would you want to eat this stuff? A tiny touch on your tongue and that's going to ruin your palate for weeks. You'll be craving these extra sweet flavors. So I really don't go for the plants, especially, which have this extreme powerful intensity. Listen, after you've been on the paleo eating program and followed the kind of sensible allergy diet eating that I'm talking about, and low in inflammatory, what are you going to sweeten? You know, if you're eating like a caveman, you don't need to sweeten meat or sweeten fish, you don't need to sweeten fruit, and you don't need to sweeten vegetables. Who needs sweet? And after a while, to be honest, even something like a carrot tastes deliciously sweet. There's a lot of sugar in a carrot. You don't notice it because you're used to extra sugar. But once you know, get rid of that, get it from your palate, then you'll realize that some vegetables are very sweet indeed. And I don't just mean, you know, sweet potato. Many sweet, Jerusalem artichoke I think is nice and sweet. Parsnip is very sweet. If you ever have creamed parsnips, or pureed parsnips I should say, because you don't need to add the cream. Very sweet and delicious, almost too sweet for my palate, you know. And this is somebody I used to put teaspoonsful of sugar in my tea 40 or 50 years ago. So if you must, you know, just a little bit of real honey, and I'm talking a little bit, half teaspoons, a little bit of real maple, that should be maple syrup, and I mean real. You know, anything that can be sold as a profit can be faked, remember, so you've got to be very careful when you do your shopping. If you must go for more, I would suggest maybe you take a look at the sugar alcohols. I don't know if you know this group of foods. They are, like it says, they're related to alcohol, but they taste somewhat sweet. They have no glycemic effect whatsoever. Sorbitol was the granddaddy of these. That was produced for diabetic chocolate and things like that. Erythritol and xylitol are two, I think, better ones. The point is they're only 1-for-1 sweeteners. You know, a teaspoon of xylitol is just as sweet or about the same as a teaspoonful of sugar, but it's 1/3 of the calories. So that's well worth bearing in mind with those things. I myself have produced a designer chocolate, a wonderful chocolate, which has got xylitol in it as the sweetener, so it's a very low. There are problems even there, of course. You may know that xylitol can cause diarrhea if you have too much of it. So I'm very careful about that and don't use much in this designer chocolate. Anyway, we don't want to go there now. This is not an advertisement. Okay, there are lots of reasons anyway for kicking all this sweetness stuff. Get rid of the sweet cravings. Don't allow it into your life. There's no question that sugar affects the immune system. It slows down white cells. That's the last thing you want. And this lasts for up to 6 hours after. You know, if you have a pot of ice cream, or you have some sugary muffin or cake or something of the sort that's full of sugar, your immune system will go to sleep for several hours. And I don't think the real worry is something like you'll catch a strep sore throat or something like that. I think the worry is that cancer cells will start getting through the net. We do know there's a connection between cancer and sugar. I'll come to that in a minute. It causes a brain rush quite unequivocally, and it's particularly bad for kids, you know, that when they're trying to be school and trying to learn things and they have sugary food, their brain's all on fire. They don't know what to do and they can't learn, can't concentrate. You've got all the ADHD things. But the sugar rush effect, not just the allergy effect I was talking about, right? I mean, I have a kiddie who was allergic to beet sugar, for example. That was the common one in Britain. Not so bad with cane sugar, so I had to get the parents to select. But, you know, even the beet sugar still caused the sugar rush, not the allergy effect, but the sugar rush. Sorry, the other way around, the cane sugar was the safe one. It feeds your dysbiosis, of course, whether it's candida or parasites or whatever. You're just feeding an adverse population down inside your intestine. We know that sugar favors cancer. Cancer has this glycation process which doesn't use so much oxygen. It's not so efficient, therefore, and therefore the cancer needs lots of sugar. So if you're playing right into the hands of the cancer if you're going to eat a lot of sugary sweet foods. Listen, we know it leads to diabetes, it leads to syndrome X and all those factors. Obesity ultimately leading to disordered glucose metabolism, insulin resistance, diabetes, the whole 9 yards, which basically means growing old way too fast and dying young. Listen, it causes tooth decay. You could go on and on with this list. It's associated with scientific studies, papers, to show all of these points connected with obesity, gallstones, all kinds of autoimmune disease, possibly these advanced glycation end products that we find in the brain, you know, associated with Alzheimer's and things like that. Ironically, they're called AGEs, and that's kind of a pun, isn't it? Ages, because it certainly does. It causes kidney damage. I could go on and on and on. Trust me, you don't need sugar. Get rid of the sugar taste. Be very wary of substitutes. Certainly don't use the herbal product substitutes. You'll be told these are natural. Sugar's not natural. Never mind something that tastes 1,000 times or 2,000 times sweeter even than that. That's very unnatural and that's very weird. And why would you? Okay. Do I need to say more? I don't think so. I hope you found that helpful and informative. Thank you.